Hello, everyone, and welcome to OST Live, a weekly broadcast on blockchain, branded tokens, and token economies built on OST. Simple Token, also known as OST, is a public blockchain platform that allows businesses to launch their very own branded tokens. And on this episode, we have a special guest. Last week, we interviewed Thomas Power, which he was a co-author of a book called Tokenomics. And now we have the other co-author. His name is Sean Au. Sean, welcome to OST Live.
Thank you very much for having me, Jose. Great to be here.
So before we get into your background, just tell everybody where are you from? Where are you calling in right now?
I'm actually calling in from the capital city of New Zealand, which is in Wellington. So it's about 6:30 a.m.
Great. So Sean is joining us very early for this interview on a Saturday morning. Sean, thank you. Much appreciated for you joining us today. So can you tell us about your background? So how did you first get involved into blockchain and crypto, and when did you start getting involved in this whole new technology space?
Yeah, so I'm an electrical engineer by trade from way back, and I've been in the software, hardware industry for quite a while, and then I got into the integration space, joining systems together. So back in 2008, there was a big buzz around cloud SaaS systems, so joining Salesforce to the likes of accounting systems, for example, and it was a really neat job and industry to be in. But then in around 2013, 14, I heard on the news about Mt. Gox. That was my first interaction, and I passed it off. And as many people do when they hear it for the first time, right? Bitcoin, blockchain, what is this stuff? And then it wasn't until about a year later that I started talking with some friends, and then we said, well, maybe we should look into this kind of stuff. So we looked into it, and then about 6 months later, believe it or not, I said to my boss, this could be something. I got to work on this full time. So it was one of the biggest decisions that I made in my life to say, quit a full-time job, sweet gig, good pay, to go into this thing that I had no idea where it was going full time. So that was in around about 2015, I think, around that time, 2016. So a couple of years, yeah.
So did you have sort of this instinctive feeling like this is going to be something's going to happen in this space? I got to do it now. Like it's either all or nothing, like as far as getting into the space.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've been doing it, as a lot of people do in the evenings, right? You finish your work, you come home, and then you start reading from like 6 to midnight, and then it just pulls you in. And I think everyone has a similar rabbit hole story, right? The more you learn about it, the more questions you have. And it's like, well, what is money, right? Who controls it? Where does it come from? And these fundamental questions that none of us are really taught at school. And then you link it to like Monopoly, where you're like the banker, right? You got money, and then when you run out of money as a banker, you can start writing IOUs to keep on playing. So yeah, it just pulls you in. And then I thought, well, what happens is in the daytime, in your day job, you can't stop thinking about what you're going to do at nighttime. So then it just builds up.
So when you went on to do crypto and blockchain full time, what was it that you went on to do? So did you go on? So now today you've spoken at several different events. You have some certification. So what did you start doing when you went blockchain and crypto full time?
Yeah, so I remember procrastinating because I looked at the white paper, the Bitcoin white paper, and it's really deceiving because I think it's 11 pages, and it took me like 2 hours to read, but about 2 months to digest, because I was Googling every single word, hash function, digital signatures, and Merkle trees. I had no idea what I was talking about. So I went straight to the bottom, the source, and I spent months on the white paper. And then after that, I downloaded the code, the source code. And then I actually, I remember spending about 3 months downloading the Bitcoin mining code for a CPU. In 2015, it was all ASICs anyway, but I went back to first principles, and I downloaded or forked Jeff Garzik Bitcoin CPU miner. And I went through the C programming language step by step, and I stripped out all the fancy stuff and started. It took me 3 months, and I managed to mine on my Apple Mac using a stripped down version of the code, working with bits and bytes and hexadecimal and understanding Coinbase, which is the very first address that when you win the puzzle, you get rewarded. That's how I learned about what Coinbase was, as opposed to that it's a big company at the moment, right? So yeah, just started from the ground up with the source code, and then learning step by step from there.
Great, and that's pretty cool that you were able to do that early on. I'm pretty sure it takes much more than a Mac now to be able to mine. So before we get into tokenomics, you've done extensive research in ICOs and in Bitcoin. So let's start there, right? So you started discussing like what is money. So what is the difference between a coin, like a fiat coin, versus a token?
Yeah, so the thing is that I had to learn this from scratch as well, because at the beginning I thought a Bitcoin was a Bitcoin and it's a coin and everything's a cryptocurrency. And then as the industry progresses, these new terms and concepts appear, and then people start using them, and then everyone starts learning about it as well. So a coin, what I discovered is that it can be described as the native digital asset of a blockchain, right? So if we think that when you create a blockchain, effectively you're creating this network where you've got all these computers that have come together to form this network. So what's going to incentivize them or motivate them to come and participate in your network? Well, you've got to pay them of some sort. So in Bitcoin, you've got this digital currency that you can reward people with. And obviously at the beginning, it's not worth anything, but now we know what it is worth. So it's a native, you must have it in the blockchain, right? So that's what the Bitcoin is. And then the token aspect of it is where, think of Ethereum, right? You've got Ether, which is the native cryptocurrency of that blockchain network. But then other people can come along and use the platform and create, if you didn't call it a token, you could call it, they could create another cryptocurrency on top, like, all the other tokens out there. But calling it another cryptocurrency doesn't make sense or doesn't feel right. So that's why you call it a token. And a token has other implications as well.
Great. So it doesn't make sense to build a cryptocurrency on top of another cryptocurrency, sort of just to wrap up what we covered here. So if it's Ethereum, this goes into utility, right? So now we have a utility token. Can you discuss what's the difference between a utility token versus a security token?
Yeah. So back in during the ICO craze of the last couple of years, all these tokens were being created left, right, and center. And as many of the people may know, a lot of it was on the Ethereum blockchain because it was quite easy and it was a very popular platform to use. So when you create these tokens, a lot of people were saying, well, yeah, buy my token and then you can get access to my system, my platform, after it's been built or released. So you can use a token as some sort of, a lot of people call it an access token or an API token of some sort, right? So it's like getting access, as I mentioned, to a system for some purpose. That's where the utility part comes from. But the funny thing is that a lot of people were buying these tokens hoping that when it lists on an exchange, they could then make 2, 3, 4, 5x their initial investment. So again, there's a debate there of whether these utility tokens were really an investment token or a security token. Whereas I think the second part of your question was around the security token part, right? So the security token is a totally different beast.
So what would be classified today as a security token?
Yeah, so a security token, if you look around the internet, a lot of people refer back to the US definition from the SEC, which is typically the Howey test. That's used quite a bit. And I think there are 4 aspects of the Howey test, which is like it's an investment of money. So you put money into some sort of as a common enterprise or a business, for example, expecting some sort of return. And I think the last part was that it's derived from the efforts of others, something like that. And it's all listed out. So these security tokens, it makes it very clear that you're putting money in expecting some sort of return. So whether the utility tokens of the past, there's still ICOs running now, whether you're expecting a return or not, it depends. And I'll leave that up for the lawyers. But yeah, it's very clear what a security token, the properties and the characteristics should be.
Great. So it's very clear now, right? So sometimes, last year we had utility tokens that people did get returns on, but that isn't the initial goal or purpose of a utility token. A utility token has a separate purpose other than being an investment.
Yeah.
So now let's get into, you co-authored a book called Tokenomics, which is releasing soon. So can you tell us about this book?
Yeah, so the idea really came around, Thomas and I, we thought, well, what's happening in this space? I mean, the build up 2015, 16, and 17, there was a lot of mayhem, particularly last year. And we thought, well, let's take a look at this. And then the more we researched, the more we discovered that there could be something here. And what we did is we documented our progress, our research on a website called theicotrain.com. And I don't know if you can pull that up for your users or later on, because it lists out all the ICOs that we looked at, the start date, the end date of the ICO, the duration, how much they raised, and the amount they raised. There's a link to the actual Bitcoin address or Ethereum address, so you can verify it. And it gives you a whole lot of, there we go. So at the moment, there's 43 ICOs that we looked at, and you can split it between the different years as well. It's not a complete list because, as we know, there are hundreds and hundreds of ICOs out there. But we started putting this together, and then we thought, well, why don't we put it into a book and write about it and share it? That's where it kind of came from.
Great. And then so last week we talked with Thomas Power, and he discussed that you guys went through hundreds of ICO white papers, right? So there's an explosion last year. So there was definitely over 300 white papers out there. So what was your experience, right? So what led you to go through these white papers, and what types of trends did you find?
Yeah. So just to clarify, when you read a white paper and you read like hundreds, you don't actually read every single one in detail, right? You can't. It takes too long. Both of us, we read the main ones. We classified them into the fastest ICO, such as Brave. I think they raised 35 million in 30 seconds or something like that. Very large ones and very popular ones. So we grouped those. So about 50 we would have read in real detail, like analyzed straight up. The other ones we would have skimmed, and then some of them may have looked fake, so we would have put them to one side, and the other ones we would have gone to various detail as well. So just to clarify, we didn't read from front to cover 300 white papers, because it just takes so long. And some of these white papers, the Telegram one, I don't know. Do you recall how long the Telegram one was?
I believe that was less than a year ago. I didn't read through it, but I think about less than a year ago that one came out.
Yeah, it was from memory about 120 pages. I mean, who's going to read 120 pages, right? And then, so you talk about the trends. Well, first of all, at the beginning, it was the length of them increased over time. So, Satoshi, 11 pages. Waves, I think, was 11. There was another one that they started getting bigger. And one of the reasons being is that the legality clause increased as well, because everyone knew that there was a legal implication. So they may have put this 10-page disclaimer either at the front or the back of the white paper as well. What we found is that at the beginning, it was very mathematical. So you had Bitcoin, Ethereum, and NXT, for example, traditional 2 columns, lots of maths equations, and hard to read for the average person. After that, we then saw that the maths was removed, and then the white papers had a bit of color to spice things up a bit, which is quite interesting. Digitix DAO was an example. If you look at the Waves white paper, there was a big front cover that was colored, and then they started adding a table of content as well, which was quite neat because it was quite useful to jump to various sections. Then after that, there were white papers like First Blood. It's going back a while now. That provided timelines of their project, funding breakdowns, and even details of their team. Singular DTV and ARC and Golem, if you look at those white papers back then, had this kind of structure as well. And then next up, there was this era where I called the executive summary white paper, because back then it was an abstract, very academic. Then there was this executive summary where the bulk of them in 2017 was very business-like, because there were sections such as value proposition and a competitive landscape and things like that. So over time, it got became more user-friendly. There's more to read, more content, and more business-like.
So over time, you started seeing additions of different sections. Now you see the team, key team members. You see advisors. Where initially in Bitcoin it was just the 11 pages straight about how it works and the technicality behind it. So
yeah.
when did ICOs start to develop? Like, what was from your research? Do you know what was the first ICO?
Yeah. So Mastercoin, way back in 2013, and you can see it on the ICO train as well. So J.R. Willett, and that white paper I read in detail because it was fascinating. The concepts back then, I think they raised, you can see there, 5,000 Bitcoins, and raised $500,000 at that time on the 13th of July 2013. So yeah, just in the very first column there. It's renamed to Omni now, actually. So the very first column, yeah. And you can filter, if you click on 2013, you can filter that as well.
Okay. Oh, great. So
yeah, by year. So
nice.
Omni is Mastercoin back then. And if you look in that white paper, it was fascinating in terms of they talked about having a stable coin. They talked about all these concepts. And in fact, there was a recent LinkedIn article from J.R. Willett asking if he was the first person that invented stable coins. And, he was just sourcing knowledge from the crowd, because in that white paper, it talked about stable coins. Stable coins is a big area. So, but he did mention it.
So when did we start seeing an increase in ICOs? Was it just 2017, where it was just the year of ICOs and that was it, the biggest year so far?
Yeah. So the statistics, when you dig deeper into the stats, you really uncover a lot of discrepancies, because you can go to all these websites that list ICOs over the various years. And I think that 2013, there was like maybe 2. And then in if you go back to the chart there, the numbers in the first 2 or 3 years were very consistent around the different websites. So very low, like single digit numbers. So I think 2014, there may have been 8. 2015 may have been around 5, 8, or 10 or something. 2016, it shot up to about 50, and it was fairly consistent. Some websites reported 43, some reported 58, for example, but around 50. But then in 2017, different websites reported around about numbers between 350 to 450. So again, you get a feel for this huge list. And if you look at the numbers that they raised, again, we're looking at thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions and then hundreds of millions. So the general trend was just skyrocketing. And what's important to note now is that although people say that the numbers are bigger in 2018, if you look deeper, it's really dominated by the likes of Telegram, right? I mean, Telegram raised, there was 2 tranches, I believe, of $850 million. That's 1.7 straight up. And then if you look at EOS, 4 billion, if you put EOS in the 2018 bucket, then all of a sudden 2 ICOs, you've got like, $5-6 billion already. So they are the outliers, because if you strip those away, then the numbers look very different. Right? So you've got to be careful when you read the stats in the media, where are the numbers coming from and what do they mean?
So why do you believe these ICOs started to pick up from 50 in 2016 to 300 plus in 2017? Did you find anything of like what happened here? Why was 2017 a big year?
Oh, I think people caught on. First of all, it was new. It's like I think of it, there's a big shiny Tesla out on the shop window, and then everyone like, wow, what is that? And there's a big line, a big queue wanting to have a look, right? Word got out, and I remember, I co-organize and run the Wellington Blockchain Meetup, and it was very obvious, back in 2015 and 16, people, about 15, 20 people would turn up. And then in the height of 2017, we'd often get like 70, 80 people in a room, all talking ICOs. And then with the chitter chatter, I remember someone telling me, did you hear about this ICO? It may have been like Omise Go or, Golem or Gnosis or something. And they were saying, did you get into the pre-ICO? And then I'd say like, well, what pre-ICO? And then, all the money's made in the pre-ICO now, right? So I was trying to get in early and then even earlier, etc. People just heard about it. They heard of the crazy amounts of money that could be made. And then they thought, well, just if you chuck in, a couple $100, you might be able to make 10 times. So they just tried it out. And then, it was fun. It was exciting, just learning the process, because it wasn't easy. You had to get Ether, for example, so you got to go to an exchange. And one of the challenges in New Zealand is that the exchanges back then, we had hardly any. And in particular, trying to convert New Zealand dollars into Ether was very difficult. That's one of the reasons why I didn't manage to get in on this wave, because we had to send our money overseas to the US via a TT or a telegraphic transfer. Otherwise, we had to use our credit card to, and there were fees in that as well. So I remember distinctly asking a lot of people, how do I buy Ether? Asking 10 people, and they'd give me all different reasons and answers. And it was a bit of a process back then.
So was local Bitcoins a thing in New Zealand during that time?
Yeah, it was. And I looked at that as well. And then you scroll through the list and you see who's offering the best deal. And then it just felt dodgy at the time, because you had to meet them at the local, some local street corner. You didn't know where they were. I know that in some of the meetups, particularly in Auckland, you could go and do in-person exchanges at the meetup. For the Wellington one, I said, you can do this as well. But, a lot of people didn't want to trade face to face, because maybe they weren't used to it. Maybe there was some sort of connotation around it, cash in an envelope sort of thing. So it wasn't really that popular, but it did happen.
Great. Now, I would agree with you. Sort of last year, there's a lot of chit chatter within ICOs and which ICO do I get into? And I believe there's a lot of like fear of missing out, and some people I feel like they got into it, and I guess it was very difficult to get into it at first, because there are so many barriers to just
Yeah.
even learning and then even actually buying any cryptocurrency. But yeah, I think that actually, like, whether ICOs, whether people see them as a bad thing or a good thing, I think this just helped bring more awareness to crypto in general.
Yeah. One thing I learned is that the word ICO, if you look at the white paper, and I mentioned this in the book, and what I discovered in the research is that a lot of the white papers didn't use the word ICO. They use, token generation event, crowd sale, fundraising, for example. And a lot of companies don't like to use the word ICO because it links, there are certain connotations that go with it, and you might get in trouble with the SEC. So yeah, some white papers did use ICO, but again, the reason why I use it is because of the link to IPO, which allows mainstream people to at least understand, to learn something new. Typically, you link it to something you're familiar with, just to help the learning and understanding. And then it was popularized by the media, so that's why we've used it in the book. But just to note that some people are wary of using that word.
Yeah, I would agree with you that the link, it's easy to connect IPO and ICO. And especially now with regulation, I guess we'll start discussing regulation. People are trying to use different terms to get around using ICO because it's not seen as a very good thing. Like it's seen like there's crackdowns and regulations. It appears to be that way. But can you tell us about what you found in regards to what's the relationship between an ICO and regulators, whether it's in New Zealand or globally or in the US?
Yeah. So the relationship is kind of like cops and robbers, right? So back in the early days, a lot of people would do this token launch and receive money, and because the value was quite low, the regulars, they didn't know about it or didn't understand it, and they didn't really care. It was like this thing on the side, very small for geeks, so they didn't really mind. But then as more attention was brought into the space, and then more money poured in, and potentially, people may have lost money, it put a flag on the regulators' radar. What I found is that, a lot of countries around the world look towards the US, the SEC, for guidance. So that's one thing. They always look for that. And the regulators, in New Zealand, there's the FMA, the Financial Market Authority. In Australia, there's ASIC, and Switzerland, UK, etc. A lot of them are actually really open. And what I found is the statements that they've released is saying, hey, we realize this is what it is. And some countries have classified it as, either maybe an asset or an investment or whatever, however they've classified it. They've got this open door policy saying, hey, come and talk to us, tell us what you're doing, and then we'll work through it with you. That is with the exception of the likes of China and Korea, who just put a blanket ban on it last year. But even if they've done that, if you read between the lines, I reckon that behind the scenes, they're figuring out ways to say, well, we want to stop it in general, but how can we work on this and capitalize on it? Because in Korea, very large companies, with the ban, they wanted to do an ICO, so they would go overseas to do it. And the government's saying, well, if you do that, then we're going to lose out on potential revenue stream. So let's work together. So, it's required. You can't get away around it. And I know that the libertarians, we want this decentralized world to live in, but you need rules. And that's just the fact of the matter.
So you do believe it will take some sort of standardization or regulation in order for crypto to be mainstream?
Yeah, I think so. Because it's at the moment, if there isn't any, then people consider it the Wild West, and in that situation, it's whatever goes. So there'll be scammers, all sorts, and that's bad, right? So it doesn't just relate to ICOs. I mean, any investment strategy, any idea throughout the whole history of humanity, you've always got people going in trying to take advantage of something somewhere. So with these regulations, with framework, with oversight, for example, it's a good thing. But then again, you'll get this debate on how much oversight, is it too heavy-handed or not? So, and that'll just continue for a while yet.
Yeah, and I think that'll take work from both sides, both from the crypto industry and leaders in the blockchain space, and within each country, the regulators. And I would agree with you, if it's known as the Wild West, and some people hear a statement like, "Oh, there's this hack," then they're not likely to get involved with it. And I guess regulation does assist with providing sort of certainty, is the right word, within business and crypto and blockchain. So
yeah, so just to add, I mean, everyone kind of gets in at the beginning with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and yes, let's unbank the banks, and let's remove every single intermediary and just let me and you trade peer to peer, and that's a great concept and philosophy, and I'm all for that. I'm all for it, but there's got to be some balance as well, right? So I mean, it's not all black and white. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and it's been a really interesting journey, right? Like 2-3 years ago in the US, you wouldn't have to worry about crypto taxes and things like that. And just the other day I was talking to like a CPA, and they're like, if you don't, if you want to be a rebel with regulation, it's okay if you live under a rock, but you can't get around it if you're a normal human being.
Well, that's an interesting point, actually, because I mean, I know the situation with banks where you've got something like 2.5 or 3 billion unbanked people, but for the lucky people like us, where we can create a bank account, it's actually really hard to survive without a bank account, because you can't get a mortgage, right? You don't have access to credit, for example, and without a credit history. I mean, living off cash 100% is, if you want to, that's great. But then you'll get a lot of people, well, they'll look at your bank transactions, and if they just see deposits and they don't see withdrawals, they're like, well, how do you survive? And if you say it's all on cash, then you'll get, people will start thinking, certain connotations. And, I've deposited, $5,000 cash into a bank once or twice, and had the teller ask me, where did this money come from? And I was like, wow, do you really need to know? But you don't want to upset them, because if you say it's none of your business, go away, then they might put a little tick mark on their monitor behind the teller screen. So you just play the game and just say, give a reason, whatever the reason is, just to keep them happy and just to move on.
Yeah, and I think the point here is to find a balance, right? Because it's very difficult, nearly impossible to live off of, right, like you said, without a bank account. Because if you manage your own crypto, you manage your own life savings, and that can be a very stressful situation. And there's also other situations where we have the bank, and that people rely 100% on the bank. So it's just finding that balance for whatever works for you individually. So now we're in 2018. We've been seeing somewhat of a downturn with the ICOs. People are using different names. They're calling ICOs, they're not, as you mentioned, they're not referred to as ICOs as often anymore. They're known as token sales, and we're not seeing very many of them. So what's your opinion on like the statement, are ICOs dead?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say ICOs are dead. I'd say that they're just going through the next evolution. So if we look at the trends in the past, first we had Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. They were all the latest thing. And then about a year and a half, 2 years later, generally speaking, it was blockchains. Everyone was a blockchain consultant. And then we had the smart contract revolution, where that was the big thing due to Ethereum. Then after smart contracts, we had the ICO boom. So this is, I think, just another cycle where everyone's created these tokens, and said, you know, buy my token, give me lots of money, and you can use it in my system. So that's kind of died down. Well, I mean, it's still going. There's still ICOs and token sales. It's just not reported as much, and no one's raising, you know, $250 million like Filecoin or $153 million like Bancor. There's not that high level of publicity, but I think what's happening is that there's, you know, everyone's taken a step back, taken a breather, and they've looked and said, okay, so this has happened. Now, why don't we start tokenizing the likes of, you know, real world security or assets sort of thing. So that's where I think the next phase of it will be.
So you sort of mentioned the next phase already of tokenization. So where do you see like crypto and blockchain over the next 10 years? Do you what do you think is going to happen? What's next for this industry to be able to thrive?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because if you start looking at the trends, then I mentioned, you know, security and tokenization of that, because it makes sense to maybe tokenize the value in your house to increase the liquidity of it. And then you've got the likes of, you know, shares and gold and all sorts of stuff. So that's physical assets where there's actually potentially real value in there. From that, if you look at the technology, what I see is that, I don't know if you've used virtual reality before, headsets in this virtual world. Have you tried that?
I haven't. I would like to. Probably will soon enough, but I haven't. So.
Yeah. I used it once and it was amazing, right? I mean, it's like, I think Facebook released the Oculus Go, I think, this year. And the technology has increased so that you don't have to put your cell phone into a cardboard cutout anymore and, you know, strap that over your face. It's all inbuilt. And as that gets better and the software around that gets better, my belief is that we'll all jump into this virtual world. And there are already movies about this, where Ready Player One is have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's a neat movie, and there's others similar to it, where everyone lives, you wake up and then you live in this virtual world. You put your headset on, and there's a really neat saying from the movie that says, I've modified it slightly to say that people will flock to the virtual world for all the things that they can do, but they'll stay there for all the things that they can be. Because in this world, you can be black, white, tall, short, you can have hair, you know, you can be anyone you want. How does this relate to digital currencies and, you know, blockchains? Well, in this virtual world, how do you transfer value, right? I mean, how do you own something in the virtual world and say it's I own it, it's real, there's only one copy, for example? Well, that's where the technology of blockchains and tokens come into it, because you, just like in video games, you can create these tokens which represent assets and then exchange them in this virtual world. So, I mean, this is looking, you know, 5-10 years out. I mean, there's probably more immediate challenges in the short term.
Yeah, you know, I think that's a very interesting point. I had a discussion with somebody about, you know, speaking about the virtual world. I forget if it's a gaming company or what it was, but it's actually virtual reality where there's, you know, actual buildings and people actually buy property and own digital property on some of these virtual worlds, which, you know, I would agree with you there. Virtual reality is definitely takes it a step further, and tokenization makes sense because it's already digitized and yeah. So
yeah.
So
just to add to that, I mean, imagine if you're disabled or handicapped, right? And then in this virtual world, you're not. I mean, that just opens a person's being, right? So that's just another addition, another angle on the virtual world that will help, I think, make it grow.
So when will your book, along with you know, authored with Thomas Power, when do you guys have that set for release?
It's actually, it was signed off, I think, on Thursday, actually, so a few days ago. So it should be out within the next week or so. Yeah, it's very close. It's been a 12-month journey of writing the book, one of the hardest things we've done in our lives, or in my life, actually, because Thomas has written heaps of books before. But it's the culmination of, 2.5, 3 years of work squeezed in just to contribute to the industry, really, because it's made up of everyone just contributing what they know, and you just play your part.
Great, and I'll link that below for those of you who are interested. It's called Tokenomics, and Sean is also Ed Chair of the New Zealand Blockchain Association and co-organizer of the Wellington Blockchain Meetup. Do you guys have any upcoming events?
We actually had one about a week ago, and that was when there was only about 20 people with about a whole bunch of empty seats. So it follows the market sentiments. So when the market picks up, more people will come. But it's great because the people that do turn up, these are the dedicated, the hardcore people who are in it for the long term.
Great. So where can listeners either find out more about you or contact you?
Yeah, so if you jump to my website, it's called talkcrypto.org/blog. You'll see that I just brain dump what I'm doing, writing and sharing. So on my blog, and the Twitter is sean.au. So it's all SEANDOTAU on Twitter as well.
Perfect. And for the listeners, if you're listening to this on the podcast version, be sure to check out the video interview on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/ost.com. And for those of you watching live, thank you for joining us live. Let's see, we have Kid Token. I don't think Kid Token has ever missed a live show. Thank you to Kid Token for joining us. We have Maxim and a few other of you watching live. And lastly, we're on the Amazon Alexa app. Be sure to add us as a skill, and you can listen to us in your daily flash briefing. Sean, thank you for joining us on OST Live today.
Thank you very much for having me, Jose. It's been a pleasure.